Hi, and welcome to Drupal Brief. This is an AI-generated brief of another video, podcast, or blog post. If you want to learn more about what's being discussed here, then please go check out the source. This podcast is produced by the team at Drupal Forge. We would love to create more AI-generated briefs like this. Please contact Salim Lakhani on Drupal Slack or LinkedIn and let him know what else you want us to cover. Oh, and if you have not tried Drupal Forge yet, you're missing out. You'll be able to do twice as much in half the time. So go check it out. Okay, that's it. Make sure to click subscribe. And here we go.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be jumping into a couple really interesting things happening in the Drupal world.
Yeah, there's definitely some buzz lately, especially around the latest Drupal Developer Survey and this whole HTMX module thing that's been picking up steam.
Absolutely. And to get into all that, we've got, well, a couple great sources to dig through. First, we've got a transcript from the Talking Drupal podcast. Mike Richardson, he was on there talking about this new developer survey.
Right, and they also did a segment on their show about HTMX. It was actually their module of the week, so that should give you an idea of how much attention it's getting.
For sure. So what we're going to try to do today is really condense all that for you, like take all this info from the survey from that Talking Drupal episode and pull out the most important stuff, the stuff you really need to know to keep up with where Drupal is heading, what trends are emerging and all that.
Yeah, it's like think of it as your cheat sheet to understanding what's going on, save you some time from having to listen to everything yourself. Plus, hopefully along the way, we'll have some of those aha moments that make it all click, right?
Exactly. So why don't we kick things off with this HTMX module?
Yeah.
It seems like that's what has a lot of folks talking right now.
Yeah, it's really gotten some traction. And like I said, Talking Drupal even featured it as their module of the week. That's pretty significant.
So maybe before we get too deep, let's back up a bit. What exactly is HTMX, like for those of us who maybe haven't heard of it yet?
Sure. So HTMX it's basically this JavaScript library, and the key thing is that it's super lightweight. It doesn't have all those dependencies that you usually see with other JavaScript frameworks, and its whole purpose is to kind of revolutionize how we handle these Ajax style interactions in Drupal.
Okay, I'm already intrigued. So like refreshing parts of a page without a full reload?
You got it. Now, as far as like who created it and all that, it actually first popped up back in May of 2023. A guy named Wurs F, he put it out there. But more recently, a developer named Father Shah have been doing the updates and keeping things moving forward.
Gotcha. And it's compatible with the latest Drupal versions?
Yeah, absolutely. The current versions, they're 1.3.5 and 1.4.0. Both of those are being actively maintained. And they support Drupal 10.3 as well as Drupal 11, which is, right around the corner.
That's great. So it's ready for the future.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, like it's still pretty new, but it's already seeing some decent adoption.
Yeah, that's right. According to Drupal.org, it's being used on about 92 sites already, and that number is, probably going up all the time.
For sure. Okay, so how does it actually work? Like, what makes HTMX so special in terms of how it handles this interactivity?
All right, so here's the cool part. To use HTMX, you got to connect this library to the render array of whatever elements you want to make, dynamic, interactive on your page. And then you control the actual interactivity itself, like how it all works through these special data attributes. You add them right into that same render array.
Data attributes, I'm not super familiar with those.
So basically think of them as instructions you attach to your HTML elements within this render array. And these instructions, these attributes, they tell HTMX what to do when a user interacts with that particular element, whether they click on something, submit a form, you name it.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture.
Yeah.
But I got to admit, for folks who might not be as familiar with Drupal's, back-end stuff, that whole render array concept, that might sound a bit technical. Can you break that down a bit more? Like, what are we really talking about here?
Yeah, no problem. So a render array in Drupal, it's essentially how Drupal builds the HTML for your page. Think of it like a blueprint that Drupal uses to structure all the elements, all the content you see on the front end. And within that blueprint, you have these HTML elements, and that's where these data attributes come in.
Right.
They're like little flags you can attach to those elements, and they tell HTMX, hey, this is how I want you to handle this. When someone clicks here, load this content. When someone submits this form, update this section of the page, and so on.
Oh, I see. So it's all about making those actions trigger these dynamic updates, but without a full page refresh.
Exactly. And that's where it gets really interesting when you start thinking about the potential this has for Drupal. I mean, imagine building Drupal sites that feel like true single-page applications, you know? You could have different parts of the page loading, updating, all super smoothly without the whole page needing to reload every time.
That would be huge in terms of user experience.
Yeah.
Like much more app-like, much more fluid.
For sure. And there's even bigger talk going on about potentially bringing HTMX into Drupal core itself, like making it a core part of Drupal.
Wow, really? So like a fundamental shift in how Drupal handles the Ajax.
Yeah, that's the idea. There's a planning issue open on Drupal.org, and there's even a proof of concept being worked on. And the way it's looking is it would be a gradual adoption, you know, maybe over multiple Drupal releases. The thought is that they would eventually deprecate those current Ajax methods that Drupal uses and really encourage developers to move over to this new HTMX standard.
Now that could be a really big deal, right? Because right now Drupal's Ajax system, it relies on jQuery, right? So if HTMX becomes the standard, does that mean we could finally see jQuery being phased out of Drupal core?
You're exactly right. That's one of the major implications. It's something that the Drupal community has been talking about for a long time, getting rid of jQuery. And HTMX, it could be the catalyst that finally makes it happen. And beyond that, HTMX, it's just so much more lightweight compared to some of those larger JavaScript frameworks like React, for example.
Yeah. They could have some serious performance benefits.
Absolutely. And here's another thing that I think is really exciting. The fact that you define this interactivity through these HTML attributes, you know, instead of having to write a bunch of custom JavaScript code, that could really open things up for developers. I mean, imagine being able to add this kind of dynamic behavior directly within your Twig templates, or even within Drupal views, you know?
Well, that's a really interesting thought. Like just by configuring a field to output the right HTML attributes.
Right. It could really simplify things and make it much more accessible for people to build these really cool interactive features without having to be, you know, a JavaScript guru.
Absolutely. Now, it's also worth mentioning that Carson Gross, he's the guy who originally created HTMX, and he's still actively maintaining it. He's actually been participating in all these discussions with the Drupal community.
Yeah.
You know, offering his expertise as they explore this whole integration.
Yeah, it sounds like there's some real collaboration happening there, which is always good to see.
For sure. But it's important to be realistic, right? Yeah. HTMX, at least the way it is now, it's still primarily a tool for developers. Like, even though it can reduce the amount of custom JavaScript you need,
yeah,
you still got to have a decent understanding of HTML and how HTMX itself works.
Yeah, definitely. It's not exactly drag and drop just yet.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about HTMX.
Yeah.
Why don't we switch gears now and dig into this Drupal Developer Survey?
Sounds good. It's always interesting to see what the survey reveals.
Yeah, for folks who might not be familiar, can you give us a quick rundown of what this survey is all about?
Absolutely. So the Drupal Developer Survey, it's basically this global effort to kind of take the pulse of the Drupal community, right? To understand what tools developers are using, how they're approaching their work, what their thoughts are about the future of the project. It's really valuable data.
Right. It gives us a snapshot of where things are at. And this year's survey, it launched fairly recently, right?
Yeah, it just went live on March 16th. So hopefully, you know, some of our listeners have already had a chance to participate. But if not, you know, there's still time. The link for the survey is iron.io dev survey 2. We'll make sure to include that in the show notes.
Perfect. So folks can easily find it. Now, it's interesting, you know, this survey has actually been going on for a while now, right?
That's right. It was originally started back in 2018 by Jeff Gerling and Chris Urban. And then after a little break, Mike Richardson took over in 2023. It's great that he's kept it going.
Yeah, it's definitely a valuable resource for the community. So what kind of stuff does the survey actually ask about?
Well, it covers a pretty broad range. I mean, it starts with some of the basics, like what operating system you use, your favorite code editor, what kind of local development environment you prefer, things like DDEV or Lando. But then it goes deeper into server-side technologies like Apache and Nginx, profiling tools, you know, the methodology you use for your development, like Agile or Kanban, testing frameworks, deployment pipelines, even security tools, you know, what you're using to keep your site safe.
Wow, so it's pretty comprehensive. It's not just, you know, surface level stuff.
Right. And to keep up with the times, they've also added questions about some of the newer trends that are impacting development. Like last year, they had specific questions about the adoption of headless and decoupled Drupal architectures.
Oh, right, right. I remember hearing about some pretty strong opinions on that front.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a bit, but this year they're actually taking a slightly different approach. They're focusing more on recommendations. So instead of just asking what tools do you use, they're asking would you recommend this tool to others?
Hmm. Interesting. So getting a bit more of a qualitative feel for how people actually feel about the tools they're using.
Exactly. And one of the most valuable aspects of this survey is that it's been running for a while now. So you can compare the results year over year, which allows you to really track trends and see how things are changing within the Drupal community.
That's a great point. Like that historical perspective is super helpful.
Absolutely. Like one example of this is, they saw a pretty significant jump in DDEV usage between the 2023 and 2024 surveys. And that was very likely influenced by the fact that DDEV became the officially recommended tool for local development. So it shows the kind of impact that an endorsement like that can have.
It's kind of like a real world experiment almost. You can see how those recommendations play out in the community.
Exactly. Now, it's interesting. Mike mentioned that they're aware of other big developer surveys out there, like the one that Stack Overflow does. But their main focus with the Drupal survey is really on maintaining consistency with their own past surveys.
That makes sense. Like you need that apples to apples comparison to be able to accurately analyze those trends.
Exactly. So let's jump into some of the interesting things that came out of the last survey in 2024. One of the findings that really highlighted the global nature of the Drupal community was the language diversity. I mean, they found that 43 different languages were spoken at work among the respondents.
Wow, 43. That's incredible.
Yeah, it really is. And nearly a third of the workplaces reported that English was not the primary language used. So it shows how truly international the Drupal project is.
It's a good reminder that Drupal is so much bigger than just, one country or one language.
Absolutely. And here's another interesting stat. They found that a pretty significant percentage, 29% of Drupal developers with less than 3 years of experience were based in Japan.
Really? That's fascinating. So there's a whole new generation of Drupal talent coming up in Japan.
Yeah, exactly. It seems like there's a lot of new energy and excitement around Drupal in that region. And looking at where people are actually working, the survey found that the vast majority, about 80%, are employed by agencies. Only about 20% were working directly client-side.
Okay, so agencies are still the main hubs of Drupal development.
Yeah, it seems like that. Now, even though most Drupal developers are busy professionals, a lot of them still find time to contribute back to the project. 25% of the respondents said they contribute to Drupal core.
That's great to hear. It's really the lifeblood of an open source project like Drupal.
It is. And another 20% contribute financially, either through individual Drupal association memberships or by attending DrupalCon events.
So a pretty significant portion of the community is actively engaged in supporting the project.
Yeah, definitely. And going back to that headless Drupal discussion we mentioned earlier, the survey results showed that there were some real challenges there, particularly around the use of Gatsby for decoupled Drupal implementations.
Yeah, I'd heard that Gatsby was a bit of a sticking point for some folks.
It was. The sentiment around Gatsby was overwhelmingly negative. A lot of developers had, encountered roadblocks or just had bad experiences with it in the Drupal context.
It's a good reminder that even though these technologies exist, it doesn't always mean they're the perfect fit for every project or every team.
For sure. And speaking of the survey itself, there was one interesting point that Mike brought up about the financial contribution question. He said they didn't actually differentiate between financial contributions made by individuals versus those made by companies.
Oh, interesting. So it was kind of a combined number?
Right. And he mentioned that they're considering adding a separate question specifically about Drupal Association membership in future surveys.
That makes sense. It would be interesting to see how that breaks down. Now, one of the statistics from the survey that really jumped out at me was the hosting provider usage. They found that a whopping 50% of respondents were using self-hosted or DIY solutions for their Drupal sites.
Yeah, that was a bit surprising, right? I mean, you've got AWS at 33%, and then you've got the managed Drupal hosting providers like Acquia at 35%, Pantheon at 32%, Platform.edge at 22%, and Azure at 13%. But that 50% for self-hosting, that's a pretty big chunk.
It is. It makes you wonder, what's driving that? Is it a preference for having more control over your infrastructure, or maybe it's a cost issue? Like managed hosting can be expensive.
It's a good question, and it also raises questions about the types of sites that are being hosted on those DIY solutions. Like, are they primarily personal projects, or are we talking about agencies and clients managing, big, complex sites themselves?
Right, because setting up and maintaining a Drupal site on a general platform like AWS, that can be pretty challenging, right? You need a certain level of expertise.
Absolutely. But the fact that the managed hosting platforms also saw significant usage suggests that there are a lot of organizations that do value that specialized Drupal knowledge and infrastructure that those providers offer.
For sure. It probably depends a lot on the size and the technical capabilities of the team involved.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, another interesting demographic tidbit, they found that 63% of the respondents who contribute to Drupal core have been working with Drupal for more than 10 years.
So the core contributor base is pretty experienced.
It seems like it. It makes you wonder, how can we encourage more new developers to get involved in that area?
That's a good point. And on a lighter note, they found that a pretty significant portion, 46% of respondents, use Drupal for their own personal or home projects.
Yeah, so it's not all, big, serious business stuff. People are using Drupal for their own personal sites, their blogs, whatever they're interested in.
That's cool. It shows the versatility of the platform, right?
Definitely. And in terms of new Drupal version adoption, one thing that stood out was that Australia had particularly early and fast adoption of Drupal 11.
Interesting. So there are definitely some regional differences in how quickly people adopt the latest versions.
It seems like it. And as we talked about earlier, DDEV saw a pretty big jump in usage, going from 42% in 2023 to 60% in 2024.
It's a good reminder that the survey is more about usage percentages than market share, right? Like people often use multiple tools.
Exactly. Now, when we look at the trends in security tool usage, it's kind of a mixed bag. There was actually a surprising decrease in the reported use of some general security best practices, things like antivirus software, firewalls for SSH access, even manual penetration testing.
That's a bit concerning, but I guess it could also mean that people are relying more on managed hosting providers to handle some of that, right?
Yeah, that's one possible explanation. But on the flip side, there was an increase in the adoption of Drupal-specific security measures, like two-factor single sign-on for the Drupal admin, firewalls specifically for the admin interface.
So maybe it's a shift in focus, like less emphasis on the server level stuff and more on securing the Drupal application itself.
Yeah, that could be. Now, looking ahead to the upcoming survey, I'm really curious to see how the questions around AI usage play out.
Yeah, that's a hot topic right now.
It is. They're not just going to be asking about what AI tools developers are using, but also whether they would recommend those tools to others. And they'll be looking at the different use cases for AI in Drupal development. Code completion was a big one last year. But are we going to see people using AI for more than just that?
Right. Like, are we going to see some real integration of AI into Drupal sites themselves?
We'll have to wait and see. It'll also be interesting to see if any of the newer AI models, beyond just ChatGPT and GitHub Copilot, are starting to make their way into the Drupal world.
Absolutely. Now, one last thing I want to touch on is the end of life for Drupal 7.
Right. That's a big one.
Yeah, but it's not expected to cause a huge drop in participation in the developer survey, right?
Probably not immediately. I mean, while Drupal 7 usage is definitely going down, it still represents a pretty big chunk of existing Drupal installations.
Yeah, and there are a lot of companies that offer, extended support for Drupal 7, so that might slow down the upgrade process for some folks.
Right. And it's worth noting that current estimates put Drupal 7 usage at around 30% of all Drupal installations. I mean, it's still out there.
Wow, 30%. That's more than I would have guessed. And we even hear stories of like really old Drupal 4 and 5 sites still running somewhere.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Like how long these sites can stick around.
So with all that said, we really want to encourage all of you listening to take part in the current Drupal Developer Survey. Share your experiences, your opinions, all that. It's a really valuable way to help shape the the future of Drupal.
Absolutely. And remember, it's at iron.io dev survey too. All the questions are optional, so you can skip anything you're not comfortable with. And it really doesn't take that long, maybe 10 minutes, tops.
Easy enough. So to kind of recap everything we've talked about, it's clear that the Drupal ecosystem is really dynamic, right? There's always something new happening, something changing.
Yeah. And there's a lot of excitement around new tools like HTMX, which could really change how we approach building interactive Drupal experiences.
Definitely. And the Drupal Developer Survey is just such a great resource for understanding where the community's at, what technologies are gaining popularity, how people are approaching security, all of that. And this new focus on recommendations in the survey, I think that's going to be really interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, it should give us some really good insights.
Absolutely. So with all that in mind, here's a final thought for you all to go on. With all these changes happening in Drupal, like the whole Drupal CMS initiative, the potential integration of HTMX, all of that, what do you think are the future innovations, the areas of focus that are going to have the biggest impact on Drupal and its users?
It's a good question to think about.
Yeah, and maybe even something to discuss with your fellow Drupal folks,
Yeah.
Get those conversations going.
And remember, the results of the developer survey will be made public. They'll be open source, so everyone can see what the community has to say. And they'll probably be a big topic of discussion at all the upcoming Drupal events.
For sure. So thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the Drupal Developer Survey and the world of HTMX. We hope you found it informative and maybe even sparked some new ideas for you.
Thanks for listening.
See you next time.
All right. What did you think? Did the AI-generated thing work for you? Let us know. Anyway, to close off this podcast, I just wanted to remind you that this brief was a fully AI-generated summary, and we take no credit for the original content. If you want more AI-generated summaries like this, then let us know. Contact Salim Lakhani on Drupal Slack or LinkedIn. By the way, we're automating the entire process from start to finish, so these briefs can be generated hands-free and on schedule. You want something else covered? We're happy to do it for you. This brief was brought to you by Drupal Forge. Drupal Forge is the new #1 platform to try, demo, and develop Drupal sites, and it is completely free to use. It is a community-supported nonprofit platform run by volunteers, just like yourself. Come join us.